Hey, Push Nation, welcome in. Pardon the informal appearance today. It's been a long day and just got done basketball practice, but I wanted to make sure I got this out to you guys. In fact, it's Tuesday night here, so you'll be watching this on Wednesday in preparation for that reading quiz tomorrow. And hopefully tonight's quick discussion on the Fireside chat kind of provides a little more context to everything in the reading. So let's get right down to it. The theme of tonight's reading and the theme of tonight's video is all about social movements occurring in the antebellum United States, especially during the 1830s and 1840s. Remember, antebellum is pre-Civil War, so before the war, and these social movements share one thing in common. People were looking to experiment and alter the status quo. Experiment and alter the status quo. American society was now almost nearing the centennial. I mean, it was the 1840s, so we're not that far away from being 100 years old. But with a little ways to go, people started to really want to kind of break out of the conventional society. We talked a lot about society in this day and age. You know, it's a very patriarchal society. Women were stuck in the Republican motherhood mentality. Education opportunities were very limited. Slavery existed, and so on. And these social changes that are going to be, that you read about and the ones that I'm going to be focusing on are very much experimental, meaning that people were trying to create a new sort of way to live life and a new way to look, a new outlook on living life. Some of these are religious. Some of these are going to be religious movements. Others were just purely attempts to experiment and to live outside the means of conventionality. So let me begin first with talking about a really neat and fascinating development that kind of gives birth to a lot of these other movements, and that's kind of, sort of the Utopian movement. And the word utopian, you know, perfect world, has been a long bantered about idea within human society. What is the perfect society? Well, one Englishman named Robert Owen, know that name, Robert Owen, believed that he had the secret to creating the best society. And Robert Owen was a socialist who moved from Great Britain to the United States. And Owen had come to the United States after having lived in the Industrial Revolution Britain, and he was caught up very much in the Industrial Revolution. That formed the basis of his socialist ideas, and he brought with him this idea that the best form of society, a utopian society, excuse me for the cough, was a socialist utopian. And Owen moved to the United States in the 1820s and started a colony that was called the New Harmony Colony, New Harmony. And in New Harmony, Owen tried to create a model society, a utopian world that really, just the word utopian, and you got to realize like these are perfect worlds, and we don't live in a perfect world. Owen believed that people would share work and labor, everything would be shared with labor, but that was just a pipe dream. And ultimately, that's what you're going to notice about all these utopian societies. They don't actually work out. But Robert Owen was one of the first pioneers of the Utopian movement. So that's why he's awfully important. So why should you care about Robert Owen? Well, he was one of the first people to try to attempt to make and create a utopian society. It failed ultimately. Most utopian societies do. I mean, you're going to go down the list here, and almost all these utopian societies, they do fail miserably. They don't seem to pan out. But Owen is a trendsetter in the fact that it's one of the first utopian societies, the New Harmony Society in Indiana. That's where they formed it, right in Indiana. Moving on with the idea of utopian. Moving on to our next utopian society, I want to talk to you a little bit about a society in Massachusetts called Brook Farm. Brook Farm was formed by a group of transcendentalists, and you guys read about transcendentalism in the book. It was a secular movement that combined both religious beliefs and the belief in the spirituality of nature. We're actually going to do a little outdoor lesson tomorrow. I moved that up to Thursday, and we're going to do an outdoor lesson in which we read and sort of become one with nature like transcendentalists and people at Brook Farm tried to. And so read up on transcendentalism, be aware of some of the key names. I'm not going to do much on transcendentalism here, but I will tell you that you need to know some of the key names. involved with transcendentalism. So make sure you go over that section for tomorrow's quiz. But back to Brook Farm, because Brook Farm was formed by George Ripley. And George Ripley was a transcendentalist, and he kind of broke away from the Transcendentalist Club, to form his own utopian society called Brook Farm. And much like Robert Owen, Brook Farm was based on a socialist model. The theory was that everybody would share labor, and everybody's labor would contribute to the greater spirituality, the greater development of mind, and the greater development of body. And Brook Farm was also formed as a joint stock company. So the idea was actually to turn a profit so that people could actually live there. And ideally that this would grow into a profitable place. It didn't. Like almost all these utopian societies, it didn't. Brook Farm eventually just was phased out. But for a short period of time, in the 1840s, it was directly an offshoot of the Transcendentalist movement. And I would always look to link Brook Farm to the Transcendentalist movement. You always want to link those two together, as Brook Farm was an offshoot of Transcendentalism. And tomorrow, like I said, I'm really excited. We'll get to go outside after the quiz, and we'll read some Transcendentalist works. Should be a great time. Moving on, off of Brook Farm, we're going to go to, something caught in my throat. Moving off of Brook Farm, we're going to take a look at another utopian society called the Oneida Community. Oneida, O-N-E-I-D-A, Oneida Community. The Oneida Community was, well, let's just say they're a little bit free. And what I mean by that freedom is that they believed in concepts of free love, free marriage. It was sort of like an early day hippie community. They believed in all sorts of free experimentation with marriage. They believed in young men being groomed by older women, to sort of be sexually liberated. It was a very free love community based on ideals that were totally out of the norm in a very Protestant Christian society that America was. And the Oneida Community was, again, it was another crack at breaking the status quo, especially when it came to relationships and marriage. They challenged conventional ideas about marriage, which made the Oneida Community, which, by the way, was in Western New York, upstate Western New York, it made the Oneida Community extremely unpopular for the fact that they practiced free love, which in many states, those concepts would have been almost against the law. The Oneida Community actually endured into the mid to late 1800s, although it eventually became phased out. But again, chalk it up as another attempt at a utopian society that's trying to challenge the status quo. And the Oneida Community, unlike Brook Farm, which was based on socialist principles and transcendentalism theories, Oneida Community was mainly based on challenging status quo when it came to marriage and relationships. Sticking with New York, another New York utopian society I want to talk about are the Shakers. Yes, the Shakers. And I actually have very keen insight into the Shakers because I grew up a few miles from where the Shakers had one of their largest settlements. And the Shakers were a very unique group, and let's juxtapose them directly back to the Oneida Community. The Shakers were abstinent. They did not believe in fornication. So you got to wonder how they thought that their long-term plan would hold up here in raising Shakers. If you don't believe in that biological phenomena, then how are you going to be able to procreate more Shakers? I don't know if they thought this one through, but that's basically one of the beliefs that the Shakers had. They were abstinent, and the founder of the Shaker movement was a woman named Mother Ann Lee. Ann Lee was her first name and last name, Ann Lee, but Mother was sort of her title, and that's kind of the way the Shakers did. They referred to each other with these kind of terms. The Shakers were actually offshoots of Quakerism. Let's go way back to William Penn and the Quakers who settled in Pennsylvania. And the Shakers got their name because when they practiced their religion, their Quakerism, they actually did it in very violent, sort of frenetic dance moves. And that was a big hallmark of their beliefs, is that they would have these long, almost all-day services, religious services, and they would shake violently. It's kind of like, who's the pop star? Oh, Lorde. If you ever seen Lorde, the pop star who's kind of disappeared, she had some big hits a few years ago. She would violently dance, and no, I'm not going to recreate it. Just YouTube Lorde dancing. It's pretty comical. Lorde reminds me of what the Shakers would do. They would dance and gyrate, and their community was always very small. But the reason I say it has I have personal insight in the Shakers, no, I'm not one of them. I actually went to I went briefly to a school called Shaker High School. It's the public school in my hometown of Latham, New York. And not that far down the street from where I grew up, there was actually like an old Shaker community. And while the Shakers eventually just were phased out for, just as you can imagine, their beliefs, of absence didn't really allow for the long-term creation of a utopian society. The Shaker community in upstate New York was pretty strong for a while. And I remember going on field trips in fifth grade. In fifth grade, we went on a field trip to a reenactment of the Shaker community, not that far from where I grew up. And one of the things I'll never forget about that trip is that they reenacted the dancing. And the Shakers were really well known for making handcrafted good wood chairs. That was one of the things they did to make money. They made great wood furniture. So, I don't know. More than you need to know about the Shakers tonight, but do check out the Lord video. You'll get a good laugh here. The last group I want to talk about as important vehicles of social change in attempts to form new challenges to the status quo is another religious group, although very different from the Shakers. Although they did share one thing in common. The Mormons, the Mormonism movement, began in Western New York. And all three of the last movements I've talked about, the Oneida Movement, Mormonism, and the Shakers, all were from New York. So how about that? Now, I'm not going to get into the philosophy. I'm not going to get into the religion of Mormonism. What I want to talk more about is the importance of the Mormon trek. Some of you may have intimate knowledge of Mormonism and how the Church of Latter-day Saints and some of their beliefs. But for our purposes, what do you need to know? You should consider the Mormon movement as a very important vehicle of change. The Mormons challenged the status quo with some of their religious beliefs, and their leader, Joseph Smith, who published the Book of Mormon and laid out the doctrine of the Mormon movement. He's considered to be one of their patrons. Smith's ideas, like all the other groups we talked about, garnered a great deal of controversy. They were going against the convention, and especially in Protestant America, any sort of offshoot of religion threatened the well-established Protestantism in the United States. Smith and his followers, which he built a massive following. I mean, just amazing how many people eventually were converting to Mormonism. The Mormon movement eventually made its way west because in most cases they were not welcome in many societies. And they eventually made their way to Illinois. While in Illinois, Smith was killed in jail. And you would think that could, end the Mormon movement, but instead the people carried on, and they kept pushing west. And one of the real names that's associated with the Mormon trek, the movement west, is Brigham Young, who the universities are named after, the great Latter-day Saint universities. The Mormon movement eventually settled throughout the West, and this has great ties here to Arizona. And eventually a strong base of community was formed in Utah, which remains to be a very strong Mormon enclave today. Why you should care about this is, like for all the other movements we talked about, they're vehicles of social change. They're challenging the status quo of the United States. It's a wonderful era to study in that sense because so much activity was going on and so many people were bringing up new ideas. And these new ideas, while some of them didn't last, they infuse a precedence into American society. That down the road, when we study the hippie movement, when we study the anti-war movement, when we study any movement in modern day, women's rights, when we study any movements that challenge the status quo, there's a precedence here. And one of the greatest moments in American history for social change was coming with all these utopian and religious societies. And of all the ones that are here to stay, the Mormon movement, no doubt, has the longest term effect. The Mormon movement is a worldwide phenomenon. And Joseph Smith, his legacy lives on here in Arizona and all over the world. And that is, of all the movements we talked about, the one that has the greatest impact on American society still today. But that does not mean those others did not pave the way for future social changes. So let's end it there for tonight. Good luck on the quiz tomorrow. This is all, fair game plus the reading. And as always, I'm going to remind you the past shapes the future. Take care.